Hello, everyone. Welcome for joining today's webinar. Apologize, we're about 5 minutes late starting here. We gave a start, and I got a message from a colleague that there wasn't audio joined, so we've restarted here. So, really important discussion today on payroll fraud, and specifically what it is that small and mid-sized companies need to know. So, if you think about who is most vulnerable for payroll fraud? There's been more big national news stories in this last 18 months than there were in the prior maybe 5, maybe even 10 years. So, there have been banks that have gone out of business. There's been ACH transaction processing companies have gone out of business. There have been payroll vendors have gone out of business. And certainly there have been many small mid-sized companies that have just suffered terribly at the hands of these criminals. And so if you think about the big companies, they've got the technology, they've got the resources, they got the money to put up the safeguards, and they kind of know what the rest of the world maybe doesn't around security. But those who are most vulnerable are the small business owners, right? We're worried about growing our businesses, growing our companies, finding talent, developing that talent, getting everybody behind our vision, rolling up our sleeves and getting after the main goal. And we think about payroll, we think about paying people on time and accurately and getting the taxes done right. But we don't think about how a single transaction that could literally put me out of business tomorrow. So hugely important topic to dive into. Really thrilled about today's guest who's joining me today, Josh Gilman. So his title is Director of Information Security at Assure, but he's really so much more. Josh is absolutely a cybersecurity expert. He's got his master's degree in cybersecurity. He is a CISSP certified. It's a certified information systems security professional. He has a board seat with the Academy of IT at his local high school, and he volunteers with local Boy Scouts. So not only is he super smart and a cybersecurity expert, but he's a pretty darn good human being. So welcome today, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Glad to be here.
All right. So there's three areas that I want to explore in today's conversation. There are lots of different types of payroll fraud, lots of different ways the criminals, the bad guys scam money. Like I said, there have been banks gone out of business. There's transaction processors gone out of business. There's payroll companies gone out of business as a result. But the most common type of fraud that exists really leaves small business owners vulnerable. And so rather than we could spend days on this topic trying to hit every single one. I first want to hit the most common one, which is payroll diversion, right? So I want to talk about that. But then, at least in the context of small, mid-sized companies, what are the technology vulnerabilities that small and mid-sized companies have? But I think maybe more importantly, that is probably undervalued is the human vulnerabilities, right? Which I think we're going to talk a whole heck of a lot about here in our first example. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into these three topics. And before talking about all the nuance, we live this every day, Josh, so we know what payroll diversion is. Let's just start out with a definition. Why don't you educate everybody on what payroll diversion is?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Yeah, so payroll diversion is really just that. It's fraudsters have figured out that it's very easy to monetize fraud, right? So they could try to sell records that they've broken into and stole from a big company, but it's really easier to just manipulate the payroll system to divert the funds from their destination, which would be an employee account, to their account. So they change the ACH, the banking routing numbers before the payroll is processed, and then on payday, their account gets paid instead of all of the employees.
So it sounds so ridiculously simple. I think when we think fraud, we think, oh, somebody came in through the dark web and they've hacked our system, they've stolen social security numbers, they've raided our bank account. It really is nothing that complex, is it?
No, really it's not. We always do like to think of the movies. We see the hackers and they're manipulating systems and it's very technical, but really as you kind of alluded to in your introduction, it's the human aspect that fraudsters have realized that they can manipulate the humans that are involved in the processes to gain access. So what does that look like? It might be, and oftentimes is, we've seen this very much over the last 18 months or so, or even more really, is that phishing is used to gain the credentials from a payroll administrator or even an employee at the payroll service bureau in order to get access to the payroll system. And then once the fraudster has access, and I should mention that because technology today, we want it to be everywhere. So we want it to be available on the web, on our mobile device. It's no longer the server sitting in the closet, my terminal here on my desk, and it connects there. Because that access, we want it all the time, and we really need it because, again, we're trying to grow business and you're really trying to focus on something else. The fraudsters then can be able to get in from anywhere, log in, they can watch the payroll, they can figure out when the payroll runs are, and then they can change, using the same access that you have, change the bank account information right before payroll.
All right, so this is kind of scary, right? So I think most everybody knows, but make sure we're on the same page of phishing. We're not Fishing,
Yeah.
we're PH phishing. So let's just break it down into the steps.
Okay.
Because this is a vendor agnostic issue, right? It doesn't matter whether you're, nobody does things purely paper and pencil anymore. At minimum, you're using, maybe QuickBooks or something, a small personal accounting system, or it's your accountant, or you use a vendor like Assure or some other software. But let's start at the upstream with the most common way this begins through phishing. Maybe gives us some examples of what a phishing scam looks like specific to bank payroll.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so, phishing is, sometimes people refer to it as spam, but phishing is really a very specific type of that. And it's an email that's targeted at a user, right, or a group of users in order to trick them into doing something. So it may be an email that looks like it's from your bank or from a payroll provider or your CPA or, any other trusted, third party that says there's something wrong with your account, or we need to verify your information, or God forbid, click here, you won $10,000. I mean, the idea is that it's trying to, the email is written in a way to make you believe that it's from a legitimate source and then trick you into doing something. And
hey, Josh, let's get specific on that, because we're not talking early days. Congratulations, you just won $1 million from Nairobi Prince, right? I mean, these are sophisticated scams. I mean, this looks very real. So kind of talk through, how real these things can look.
Yeah, I mean, when you click that link in that email and it takes you to that landing page, it's going to look exactly like your standard Chase login page, Bank of America, Netflix. I mean, really any Office 365. A lot of customers use, a lot of people use Microsoft products. They're going to build a page that looks exactly like the legitimate login page, with the intent of bringing you to that page and having you put in your username and password.
And so, like everybody knows what a Netflix login looks like.
Right.
We're probably more vulnerable here because we assume the bad guy, which is probably somewhere else on the globe, cloaked through a bunch of IP addresses that reroute to each other, right? So we don't even physically know where these people are. But even going further upstream, these guys become legitimate customers of these payroll providers to even learn what the systems look like in the first place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're definitely, looking at all open source information. So they're looking at information on payroll providers, from open source, Google searches, LinkedIn, all the different kind of publicly available information gathering. So they're learning what those sites are, and then they're driving in to see okay, what does a, you know, a Sure page look like? What does an ADP page look like? What does a Paychex page look like? What does a Chase Bank? I mean, all of them, they're looking at all these different things. And I should mention that oftentimes, because users reuse passwords across accounts, they don't even have to be, the particular phish doesn't even specifically have to be your payroll provider. It could be your bank account, because and you may share the password across those two accounts, and that's just as good as if they spoofed the payroll page.
Right, right.
So, vulnerability number one, don't use passwords across more than one site.
So
Yeah.
we know they're sophisticated. You know, what would be some really specific examples of what this email would look like, and then why should we be concerned? What are the things that should be tipping people off about that email?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the first thing is, and I kind of go back to my previous point about they're trying to manipulate weaknesses in the human, right? We all want to provide the best customer service. We want to provide, that responsive service to our customer, or, if the email may be written in a way to cause alarm, to say you need to save your account today from being closed. So they're always trying to elicit a sense of urgency, whether it's an issue with a customer or it's your account has been compromised, please verify your password. So they want to elicit that sense of urgency to help to prevent you from taking time to look at it and saying, this might not be right. So other things that you might find, or that you often find in phishing emails, is poor grammar, which may be just something as simple as a misplaced period or comma, or words that are pushed together, or other just kind of basic poor grammar mistakes. We see that. Another way to detect this is to look at the URL before you go to it. So if there's a click here link, you can hover over that and your computer will show you what the link is. If Chase is asking you to go to Chase's website, and then when you hover over that link, it's not a Chase link, that should be red flag, right? You're going to the wrong page. So looking at that URL, comparing to where you think you're going to where they're actually sending you, is another one. But the sense of urgency is the one that I see across all phishing attempts.
Yeah, so anything that the bank is the one reaching out to you, the payroll provider is reaching out to you, those are the ones to instantly be suspicious of. So
Yeah.
what some of these, so I think we see these attacks in our business, maybe it's not every day, but it's certainly every week. And I'd say there's a lot of sloppiness out there, right? With grammar and font isn't quite right, and just your hair stands up on the back of your neck a little bit and say, this just seems wrong. But they're getting better and better every day. So if you get an email that is unsolicited, hey, we need to verify such and such, and it looks perfect, font, color, everything, and you hover your mouse over, I mean, it could be a URL that even includes the word that looks familiar to try to trick you, but it's off by a few characters, is how they get a domain name to do it.
Yeah.
What if you get this unsolicited email? What should you do? Because you don't have to click on it, right? Just to find out if it's real or not.
Yeah, the best thing to do is to go, what we call in the security world, out of band. So you, instead of replying to the email or clicking the link, it's picking up the phone and calling your contact. So if it's a email that's spoofing your payroll provider or your bank, calling your rep and saying, I got this email, I'm looking at it and thinking, I think it's suspicious, can you please advise? And they will help you through that. Because sometimes, organizations do send emails that are asking you to do something. Again, so that could be suspicious, but you just, again, stepping out of the email process and reaching out to somebody and saying, hey, I think this looks wrong, can you help me?
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be a phone call, right? I mean, internally, sure, we'd love a phone call because, human beings is
Sure.
part of the security layer. But if it's an app, if it's
Yeah.
a website, go there,
Yes.
but just don't click on the email, right, to get there, right? Do your own in route of the circuit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so the front end, they figure out what, the banks and payroll providers login pages look like. You
Mhm.
get some unsolicited email and something that is urgent. Hey, there's a problem with your account. We need you to verify something. We think there's been suspected fraud. Please verify. Something to create a sense of urgency, to get you to act, to hopefully not think and act in fear.
Yes.
Not really rationally, right? They're hitting the old amygdala. But then let's say they do get you to click and you're on the page. The user experience looks just like you're on, say, your bank's or your payroll provider's site.
Mhm.
Take us specifically. It's essentially nothing more than direct deposit transactions is the most common, right?
Yeah. So once they've gained access to the system and they're in and they're what they're doing is they've set up these pay card accounts. Usually you can set them up very easily, usually with limited identification. And with them, they have a routing and banking account number attached to them. They're not just a debit card or credit card. And they use those accounts. They change employee direct deposit. Oftentimes, if they get access to the payroll system, we've seen that they will literally change every employee to 2 or 3 accounts all at the same time. And then the entire payroll run gets diverted to these accounts. And it's worth noting that there's they're exploiting a technical vulnerability, not to jump ahead, but this is really relevant here, in the way that the ACH process works, just because there's a delay, 3 to 5 days delay in when funds are paid out versus funds are received. And so there's the ability for them to receive the funds and then empty those accounts before anybody can call the transactions back.
Jeff, go deeper on that, because
Sure.
these guys are absolute experts in the banking system. They understand the movement of money and how ACH transactions work. Can you? I think most people understand. Hey, you send an electronic transaction.
Yep.
It's commonly takes a day or two, but walk through the details so everybody understands what really happens there and why this vulnerability exists. Regardless, this isn't a Paychex issue or an Assure issue, an ADP issue, or a QuickBooks issue. This is a banking system issue.
Yeah, it is absolutely, and it's a vulnerability that like you're saying is across the entire payroll business. It's not a specific system. It is just the way ACH works. The payroll provider has to debit the funds from the employer's account, right? The account that's funding payroll, and then they're paying the employee accounts at the same time. But there's that delay, so that there's a gap in when the fraud gets identified before, and then there's no way to really recall those funds back, because by the time it's notified, by the time essentially the employees are starting to call in to the business saying, hey, we didn't get paid today, the funds basically have already been emptied from their account. Because it's not just one fraudster. These are usually crime rings. These are people that are responsible for picking up those payroll cards and getting them, kind of collecting them. Then there's people that are responsible for emptying the payroll cards. And then there's people that are responsible for kind of setting up the fraud, getting into the account, sending out the phishing emails, these sort of things. And so it really is kind of the new organized crime is really just moved online.
Yeah, so let's talk maybe a little bit, Josh, about how it's so easy for this stuff to fall under the radar, right? Because this is not like, as an entrepreneur, I pretty much know how much money I've got in my bank account. I've got it, if I don't, I know it within, 7 seconds with my thumbprint on my phone. And so I may not be surprised, because I'm not looking at the individual transactions to my employees, but I'm like, oh, I thought payroll was going to be X this week. Make sure X came out. Yep, looks like that looks right. Because they're stealing bank account information on a per employee basis, this flies under the radar a lot of times.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if because they're not stealing money directly from the business, like you're saying, they're not logging in and taking money directly out of the business's account, but they're kind of manipulating the payroll system so that through the normal course of money transfer, that is the payroll process, right? We're transferring money from accounts, right? We're just changing, they are changing the destination right before, so basically right before the payroll is run, they change the accounts, the payroll is run and processed, everything looks legitimate from the payroll processor side. And then those funds essentially end up in the wrong account, and then you find out once the employees start calling in and saying that they haven't been paid.
Yeah, right. And so now you have an employee that by law, you still have to pay. Beyond law, it's the right moral thing, you got to pay them.
Yes.
But your money's already gone. So now you've got an employee who doesn't trust you, you're out of the pocket, and you've got some bad guy somewhere around the world that has access to your system, and you don't know who it is or even necessarily how, right? So what do you do once you learn there's a problem?
Yeah, so obviously you have to start the investigation process, and that's starting the conversation with your payroll provider to say, when were the transactions, when was it changed? Obviously, as a business owner, you know that you didn't change the accounts because your employees aren't getting paid. So you have to start the conversation of saying, okay, how can we investigate? How can we find out where the changes were made? And so looking at the timestamps within the system, saying, okay, these accounts were all updated on, Thursday, before a Friday payroll, all at the same time or within a few minutes of each other. So clearly that would identify fraud. The question then becomes, because you brought up, well, my money is gone. How do you determine who was responsible? So this fraud, payroll diversion, can happen on kind of both sides of the coin. So it could happen because the small business's account, right? So you have access to your payroll system to update employees and modify payroll, et cetera. So it could happen by compromising that account. It could also happen on the payroll system, right? Payroll provider. So this is a vulnerability that's kind of across the board. And so they have to determine where that fraud happened. And then generally that business would be the one that would be responsible for covering that loss.
All right, so I'm a big company. I've got a payroll manager and probably reports to a CFO or a controller. They're trained in all this stuff. I've got great security. What kind of guidance would we give to the average small business where the person running payroll probably has many hats? It could be the owner, right?
Oh no, you're absolutely
right. Or maybe it's an office manager, right? Maybe it is in a bigger organization. It could be director of finance, could be the controller, but payroll is just one of their jobs. So I'm thinking, I just know how many hats, say an office manager might wear that I think has some extra vulnerabilities. What guidance would we give before we start talking technology?
Yeah, so definitely. Again, not to jump ahead too much to the section on human vulnerabilities, but training. As a small business, even as a small or medium-sized business, the pound for pound, dollar for dollar, the best return on investment in security that you can make is training your people. Security awareness training can be for a few dollars a year per employee and can pay huge dividends in the employees' awareness on things like not reusing passwords, creating strong passwords, looking and identifying phishing. I mean, these platforms often include, phishing simulation that with a few clicks, you can send some employees simulated phishing emails and test their awareness in the wild, basically during their course of their job. It's a very simple, very easy, cost-effective strategy that can that can scale from a small business with 5 employees to a mid-market business with 500 employees. The same solution would cover both.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate that. So we'll go a little bit deeper into the two different types of different paths now, technology and human. We
Yeah.
spent 25 minutes talking on this topic. On one hand, it's a 30-second topic. Oh, you get a phishing scam
Yeah.
email, don't click on it, right? It's that obvious because people log into your payroll system and they can change the account numbers and routing numbers and direct deposits go to them. It's super simple, but all the ways in which, sophisticated ways in which it happens is why this is the #1 type of fraud that exists. And it could, if you're a small business fighting for your life through a pandemic here, this is the kind of thing that could put you out of business. So I would say just take it with the dead seriousness that we intend, and why we're making a whole lot of our webinar on it. So let's take it to a different angle here and just talk technology, Josh. So even if you've got perfectly trained human beings that know not to click on stupid stuff, there are still technology vulnerabilities that exist. What are some of those?
Yeah. So, I think, just at the core level, what's a vulnerability, right? It's just a flaw in a piece of software that allows someone to, manipulate it to gain access, to gain inappropriate access to a system. And so those vulnerabilities can really occur in any piece of software. That could be your phone, so iOS or Android, they have vulnerabilities, absolutely. I know especially like Android, quarterly you're getting security updates, right? That's to patch security holes. Same thing with Windows. We're all very familiar probably with the Windows update process. The vast majority of those Windows updates are security related. They've determined that there's a hole in that vulnerability or in that software, and that this is the patch for it. And so
maybe more specifically, some other bad person found a vulnerability and they learned about it the hard way. So they had to fix it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's the worst kind, the ones that are found by attackers before they're identified by the vendor.
Yeah, right.
Right, because really, you can install antivirus software on your computers or on your phone or other technology, but if the vulnerability isn't there that the virus was intended to exploit, it doesn't work, regardless of whether you have antivirus or not. I'm not saying don't have antivirus, but what I'm trying to get at is that updates, ensuring that your systems are updated, whether, again, if that may be difficult if you're a 5-person small business, and as you said, Mike, everybody's wearing multiple hats. Are you trying to do this yourself? Do you have an IT partner that maybe manages that stuff? And certainly as you get bigger to a mid-market, 500 employees, the technology grows exponentially. Servers, printers, computers, phones, it all grows exponentially with the employees. So it just becomes more difficult to manage.
So to recap that one, so just the obvious stuff like apply the Windows update, subscribe to auto updates from your software provider, from your operating system of your computer, to your network, right?
Absolutely. And it's not just the operating system too. It's with Windows and with Macs, third-party software that you have installed. That's where it becomes a little more difficult, because maybe the auto updates doesn't catch it all. But certainly when there's an auto update functionality, do it. And when it pops up and says, hey, you need to restart your computer, or hey, you need to apply this update, take that with seriousness, because it's trying to fix an issue with that software.
Yeah, and it's because they found a weakness, and it's probably, they don't admit it, but when if you live in the technology world, that there are bugs that come along with new releases. But when you're talking about platforms that have existed live in the wild in the marketplace for many years, if there's a security update, it's probably because somebody else found a hole they didn't know existed. So absolutely take that serious. All right, what about if people do get access. I'm thinking like data, database vulnerabilities versus say hardware or network vulnerabilities.
Yeah. So I mean, at the small business and really at the business level in general. So as far as preventing unauthorized access, this is really where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Preventing someone from getting in is really the key. And so that's securing your accounts, not reusing passwords over and over again, creating more secure passwords. So, humans, and I tell you, as a security person, we're complicit in this as much as anybody, right? We've taught people to create bad passwords over the last 10 or 15 years, and now we're kind of paying the piper, so to speak. By making people change passwords routinely, one of the things we've found is that people just will kind of create a different permutation of that password. They'll change one character, and humans are very predictable. We like to work in patterns. So typically passwords created by a human have capital letters up front, lowercase in the middle, numbers and symbols at the end. So it's very easy to look at a word and say, what could a password used based on that word be? And then it's easier to guess. So how do you not do that? Well, use technology. There are password managers that will generate passwords for you, long, complex passwords, and then not require you to remember them because it will help you autofill, whether on your phone or on the web or on your computer. And so really kind of taking that guesswork out, and just let technology do what it does really well, and that's create random passwords versus trying to do it yourself.
Gosh, I'm thinking I should have had a poll as part of this webinar. How many people got a little cringy when Josh just said capital letters at the beginning, lowercase numbers at the end? I know I did a little bit.
I know, right? It's the way that our language works. Especially in the Western world, we write from left to right, and capital letters start the sentence, and then lowercase, and then let me just throw some numbers and special characters on the end because the system tells me I have to have it. It's just
they turn out to not be so special. They're the end of your phone number or your street or something, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And the newest guidance coming out from the security world now is to forget all of that and create kind of words based or passwords, really more of a passphrase than a password. So think something like Mary had a little lamb, but not. Usually something with just maybe 4 random words put together that don't form a sentence. It creates much, if you have to have a situation where you have to create the password yourself, that's an easier way to do it, right? Just 4 words that you think of and then put them together, and it's very difficult for an attacker to guess that.
Yeah, that's good advice. So, again, we think about the James Bond kind of movie scenes. This is not, I mean, well, maybe in theory, it's such a huge percentage of people who do payroll. It's, maybe it's on you have a local install of QuickBooks, but I mean, are people really going to be hacking the inner workings of QuickBooks when if they have access to your computer and the login, they're just gonna do a diversion tactic, right? Why? There's no need to get into the quote unquote database or the software under the covers if you have a legitimate user, right? Put a screen cap. They can get access to the machine, put a screen capture on, and capture your keystrokes and figure out your login, and then just have at it. So, can you maybe speak to that? That I think it's a little bit of a misnomer that the technology side of this really isn't the threat that maybe everybody thinks it is.
Yeah, that's really it. That's right. So it's while there's a technology aspect of it, it's really the attackers have figured out where the seams in operations or processes are, and they look to exploit that. Maybe where you're again leveraging a vendor or a partner to offer a service. So there's a gap there where you think they're doing it, they think you're doing it, and then the attacker can exploit that, whether that's malware or phishing or whatever. But it's really kind of the people and the processes side or the human aspect that really kind of makes the vulnerability more exploitable, or really makes it exploitable at all.
Yeah. So do you think, is it safe to say then from the tech, certainly there are maybe small, lesser known, maybe regional, local payroll providers that, you really should be maybe concerned about. But for the most part, you take a national company, an ADP, a Paychex, and Assure. I mean, you're not hacking our stuff because it's in AWS, and you're not going to hack AWS.
Right.
It's world class, right? You're not going to get behind the systems.
Yeah.
Not going to get in the database, and you're never going to get in the firewall, because and same thing for all the big nationals, right? This
Yeah.
really is more of a human issue that involves some technology stuff, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, in the end, attackers are lazy, right? They want to employ automation. They want to use scripting to, blast out automated phishing emails, or to send malware out, through other compromised systems. They're just, it's not like, again, it goes back to, it's not the movies where some person is just, manually typing thousands of lines of code to try to break in. They're looking for the path of least resistance. What is
yeah,
the easiest way into the system? Like you said, they're not going into AWS and breaking through 15 different layers of security to try to get into where the database is, to extract data from that, and then have to figure out how to monetize that somewhere else.
right,
Right? They want to go right to the source. You're moving money from one account to another. Let's attack that directly and get them to move money directly into my account.
Yeah. I
And
mean, the best
really
security system on your house is a well-lit front porch, right? I mean,
exactly.
criminals are going to look for the unlocked car by just simply lifting the handles and see which doors are locked or not.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So with that, let's then jump to bucket number 3, which is, I think, where the real vulnerability is, and we hit on a lot of this on this, the phishing emails and payroll diversion, but let's go deeper on what the human vulnerabilities are when it comes to payroll, because I think this is the biggie.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, we talked about kind of people in training awareness of, for phishing, but there's also, I would say processes. So processes may straddle both technology and people, but really we're going to probably just talk about it here because I think it best fits this way. And so it's, when you are a small business and there's 5 people and you're the business owner and you are, running payroll, you're managing the books, you're kind of managing all of those back office kind of administrative tasks, right? There's a very low risk of fraud because you're the one doing it. And then as but as you grow, invariably, right? Because that's the intent, we want to grow. You're not going to be able to do it all, and you're going to have to hire people that handle those processes for you. And then it's, at that point, then it's, are you, looking at, background checks, credit checks, to verify people who they say they are and their background, right there, to kind of look at the humans directly. But then what about processes? Again, when you're the one as the business owner doing the books and the payroll, et cetera, right? There's probably not really much need for someone to double check you in the sense, because you're probably not trying to defraud yourself. But as more people become involved in the system, there's also, not just from a fraud like theft, but, human error. There's just more errors that could be brought into the system. So it's, how are the checks and balances, or in the security world we call separation of duties. So how are the checks and balances in your processes created to review the different processes to make sure that the possibility of error is reduced, the risk of fraud is reduced, by double checking someone's work, and that sort of thing.
So, we tend to think of criminals as these evil characters with bandits masks over their faces, right? But the really, really sad, harsh reality is an awful lot of payroll fraud is insider stuff, right? It's not somebody from the outside it's a result of a phishing scam. It's the office manager whom you've had in your home and you love and trust, and all of a sudden 10 years later you are flabbergasted, awestruck to learn for the last 6 years you've been being stolen from, right? So talk to us about what some of those checks and balances look like for a good, healthy, and trustworthy company, because we don't want, if you're trying to grow your business, you don't want people that feel paranoid, like you don't trust them to do their job. Yeah. But you also need to have reasonable guardrails up, the checks and balances. Can we talk through what some of those might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, it's setting the right flags within the system. So if payroll is beyond a certain point, I mean, you know what your average payroll is on a payroll run. Say maybe even plus or minus 10, 15%. You may know that your bonuses are only run once a quarter, and so set the flags up in that system that if the payroll exceeds a certain point, that it requires an additional check, right? Whether that goes to you or if you're partnering with a payroll provider, have the checks at their end. Say, have the conversation with your account rep and say, my payroll each week is $10,000. If it's $12,000, I want an email, or I want a phone call, or I want some notification where I personally approve that, to make sure that that this is legitimate, right? Or if we run an out-of-cycle bonus or other pay or an out-of-cycle payroll, that I'm informed. So use the checks that are within the system. Use your relationship with your vendor partner to kind of create those additional checks. You certainly could create a check where before a payroll is run, the payroll administrator preps the payroll, and then just you're required to look at it as a business owner, or as maybe another person. Maybe you have the office manager run payroll, but your bookkeeper would be the person that reviews the payroll and approves the payroll before it's sent, right? So separating those duties out, where two people have to look at a particularly vulnerable or risky process.
Talk about reports as a source of vulnerability, and specifically, some people still love paper, right? And
yeah, absolutely. So certainly, I mean, data in any form, especially personal data, is a risk. So whether you have it around, you have too much of it, if you're retaining records on employees or people longer than you need to, that's a risk. And once you print something, you can lose track of it very quickly. It can be left on a desk. The cleaning crew can come in after hours and pick it up, or it could be thrown away in the trash, and someone could be pilfering through trash and find information that way. And so certainly, again, as many people still prefer to touch and read paper, but limiting that, or having a disposal process, right? So, if your business, your office, have a shred bin or a shredder, and that's where paper reports go. Like we don't put paper in the trash, we put it in the shred bin, and it goes there. So certainly, and then trying to limit, especially right now, with so many businesses working from home, it's very difficult. Many employees, I'm personally just, I'm a long time work from home person, ever since I got out of the Army a few years ago. So I've been working from home for a long time, and I would say fairly skilled at it. Maybe we're all fairly skilled at it now. But one of the things, now working from home, printing paper is a big risk, because are your employees, who usually would just walk to the shred bin and throw it in the shred bin there in the corner by the break room, what are they doing with that at home? And how can you verify that they are doing or aren't doing it? So if they do have a shredder, maybe you've provided it, maybe not, maybe they have one. How do you control that? How do you ensure that they're shredding it? And so that becomes a very, again, a fairly vulnerable process, because there's very limited way to check. And so trying to get, employees, or getting employees to reduce the amount that they print especially when they're away from the office, is definitely a big security risk.
Yeah, you know what? Last point. Let's maybe jump in, and then we'll hopefully have just leave a few minutes here for Q&A.
Yeah.
And as a note, if you guys on the call in the GoToWebinar user interface, there's a section for questions. Go ahead and type them in there, and we'll get to as many as we can just in a couple minutes. But at the end of the day, so if the real threat isn't necessarily getting behind the scenes, hacking data centers and databases. It really is just physical access to the computers, the phones, login in username and in password information. That's where the real threat is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not the insider job of that office manager who really is a trustworthy soul. But what does that person have to do? What safeguards should be in place to make sure that no one else, maybe the brand new employee that you don't have the relationship with, like you said earlier, maybe it's the cleaning crew, right? Maybe it's the person who comes and waters the plants. What do you got to think about? Just simply physical access from the hardware, but then also access to the software.
Yeah, so it's really looking at like the end-to-end life cycle of data. So where do I get it? How do I store it? How do I handle it while I have it? And then how do I destroy it? So it's like looking at all along that process. So maybe it comes in and you have it via email and it gets stored on a server, and then it gets printed. Then what do you do with it, right? When it gets printed, how do you destroy that? And then ultimately, how do you delete it off the system when you no longer need it? All right, really, because go back to this, and we all oftentimes get this, we don't want to throw anything away because we don't want to delete data because I might need that. But any data that you have, especially about people, is a risk. It's a risk of compromise, it's a risk of breach. Someone could come in and steal a computer, or they could lose a computer, their laptop, they're working from home, or they're on the road, they leave it in their car, it gets stolen. Reports get stolen out of a briefcase or at a coffee shop. So it's all risky. So it's really looking at that. What is the life cycle of your data? So how do you get it? How do you handle it, store it, and then how do you delete it?
Yeah, very good. All right. So if you guys want to pop into the questions section, put your questions in. It'll take them a second. So if you don't know who Assure is, we are a human capital management company. We have payroll and tax, HR and time and attendance software, and HR services designed specifically for companies to help them grow. So our job is to give you the tools to pay your employees, attract the right people, find the right talent, develop that talent, to get everybody behind your vision, and all doing so in a way that helps you manage your money and stay compliant and out of trouble with the law. So with that, if you want to go to the question answer, we will take the next few minutes and answer some questions. So let me pop this out. Okay, will the slides be available? So this entire deck the session is being recorded, and everybody is going to receive an email tomorrow. And this will be available for on demand on our website to use at your leisure. So, okay, folks, appreciate folks on prevention. I was burned in my recent. I won't say the name of the company because it was part of payroll system. I was using the insurance company, denied the claim for money lost. They said I had given the fraud access to the funds and that voided the coverage. Please comment on the insurance side of the issue and what is customarily covered or not. So, you know what? I'll say from the jump. Josh, I'm going to ask you to comment, but I'll say from the jump, this is a little bit out of our world because this is going to be very specific to your insurance policy and for you to work out with your carrier. So it'd be inappropriate for us to make a declaration on the topic. But Josh, what would you have to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can comment from maybe my own experience. I mean, this is something that we deal with. I deal with the cyber insurance, our carrier and our coverage, all the time. And so one of the things is, so kind of it goes back to processes and training. That oftentimes on the your insurance application, they'll ask questions about did you conduct training? Did you conduct phishing simulations? Do you have, you know, antivirus, Windows updates, you know, these sort of things turned on? And so the better that you actually do all of those things, right? Provide training to your people, potentially do phishing simulations, you know, ensure your computers are updated and that you have all of the basic security software like antivirus and those sort of things on there, reduces that potential loophole for the insurance company to come back and say, sorry, you didn't have X, or you didn't train your people, so, you know, we can't cover your claim. On payroll diversion, I have seen claims be covered. We've gotten claims covered. I do know that they are covered. Insurance companies are what they are sometimes, but I would just say is that making sure all of your bases are covered and that ensuring all of the kind of basic safeguards are in place will help prevent, you know, that denial of coverage.
Hey, Josh, we got somebody on our show here today bringing up a different flavor, if you will, of payroll diversion, phishing email that they had at their company. Let's explore this one. So they had an email sent to their HR department that had the employee's name, asking them to make the change. So it wasn't even their own fingers getting dirty. Hey, payroll manager, give me your username and password. It's very a good looking email that looks like it's coming from your employees saying, hey, I just moved to change banks. Can you change my information to such and such?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can imagine, you know, Assure software with all of the number of employees that we have that say payroll specialists. We see hundreds of these emails in our environment a day, and it goes back to a couple things. One, you know, people often ask, how did they know I was the payroll manager? How did they know that I was the person they're supposed to send the email to?
Yeah.
You know, open source intelligence gathering, things like LinkedIn, your company webpage. There's just dozens of sources out on the web where they can collect information about who works for what company, who is the payroll or who is the HR manager, and then it's literally using tools very similar to, and I'm sorry to do this, Mike, but that marketing folks use to send automated emails, the fraudsters are using to send these spam emails. So they're not using the Marketo and the HubSpots of the world, but they're tools that are essentially doing the same thing. They're sending automated emails that fill in data, right? So that takes employee name that I've got from this list, and I send it to, you know, employee X, you know, the payroll manager, right? So I found the HR manager and I'm sending that email. So it's all automated. And yeah, they're absolutely trying to manipulate. The worst is that I've seen is that they're spoofing the CEO, you know, or other high-paid employees who may not check their bank account every week, right? And so it may go 2 or 3 weeks before they realize they didn't get paid. And then also it's a bigger hit to the company. But yeah, that's a very common form of threat. The good news is that you will only usually get 1, maybe 2 employees at a time. The reason we focused on the more broad payroll diversion is because, you know, a single company in a single instance could lose $80, $90, or $100,000. Literally might be to the point where you might be put out of business because with that significant amount of loss. But absolutely, the individual payroll fraud is just as big of a threat.
Yeah, that's a common one. I get the occasional email that's from my boss, our CEO, and you know, it's an easy name to find as a publicly traded company, and he has a very specific style of email, so it's usually not hard to say, hey, that doesn't sound like, that's not how he talks to me. But it's, hey, I need help with such and such. Can you please do X, Y, Z? Yeah, that happens all the time.
Mike, on just one thing, as I would say, is that comes back to the people and the processes side. What is your process for verifying that somebody is who they say they are when they make a request like that via email, right? So it's just like if in the IT world, if someone sends a request that says, hey, please reset my password. How do I verify that the person on the other end of that email, which you can't do, is who they say they are without going out of band, making a phone call or typing up or starting a whole new email and responding to that employee completely separately and saying, hey, I got this request, is this legitimate, right? Or making the phone call and saying, hey, Bob, did you just send me a request because it looked suspicious and I just want to check before I do
All right, I'm going to take one last one. I know we're at the top here, but all right, we switched from a paper copy to the employee logging into their payroll portal and change their own direct deposits themselves. We in turn get notified the employees made the change. Do you still recommend us contacting the employee to make sure that they made that change?
So let me make sure I got this correct. So when the employee makes the change, you get notified that the employee makes the change. The employee has made the change.
Yeah,
yeah. Okay, got it. Right. So no, I don't necessarily think so. So I mean, if you've left it to the employee, and hopefully you've encouraged that employee to use a strong password, potentially even multi-factor authentication or otherwise secure their account. But no, that's and actually in that scenario, that is the control that I would recommend, is that if you're giving it to the employee to let them self-service, which is a good practice, that you're still getting that email and you're notified when the the direct deposit was changed. Because if, say, more than one account was compromised, or if somebody's account was compromised and they changed all of the accounts, you're getting those emails saying, hey, these accounts have been changed, and it gives you the opportunity then to go in and say, no, this isn't quite right.
Which kind of brings us full circle, right? There's a technology component and a physical human being process component, because when it's not just the office manager as a singular human being that can make these changes, but now it's all employees can change their own direct deposit. So that criminal doesn't like that as well, because they can only, the max they could get is however much your paycheck would be. What they want to do is they want to go and change 5 or 10 or 50 direct deposits accounts the night before a payroll run and sweep their entire payroll because they're greedy. But nonetheless, if you got 25 employees, you just took the vulnerability from one person and you spread it out to 25, which makes all that much more important. If you got good technology processes, if you got good human being processes, you got good training in place in ways to inspect. So I would agree, but thanks, Terry, for that question. All right, we're over on time. We got a handful of questions left. I apologize, we couldn't get to all of them. Some of them are pretty specific on product, and this is not meant to be a sales pitch. This is meant to be an education for everybody, regardless of what platform you're using. So if you asked a question that was specific, hey, does the system or does your system do such and such, we'd love to have a conversation with you. Hop on the website, fill out a form. We'll have a salesperson in contact with you, and we'll get you a demo, and you can ask all those questions you want. But until then, I want to thank everybody for their time and look forward to talking to you on our next webinar. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, thank you.